Arriving at NATO headquarters earlier on Thursday, Europe's defense ministries had one common message, that there could be no negotiations about Ukraine without Ukraine and Europe at the table too. The question is, what extent the US is listening? After a frenetic 24 hours of US declarations, there is a tangible sense that Europe's leaders have been caught by surprise, that they now fear being bypassed on any potential Ukraine deal and being deprived of a voice on the future of European security.
Continued cooperation with US administration is an important topic of our discussions. There is no better guarantee for the security of our continent than close transatlantic cooperations. But Europe should do more and more for its own defense, both for the sake of the alliance and for our own sakes.
Ce qui se joue, ça n'est pas seulement l'intégrité territoriale de l'Ukraine.
What is at stake is not only the territorial integrity of Ukraine or the security of the European continent, it is the future of international law, because abandoning Ukraine would mean definitely entrenching the law of the strongest. It would mean an invitation to all the world's tyrants and despots to invade their neighbors with complete impunity.
De la planète à envahir leurs voisins.
Well, for more on this development, international affairs analyst Dr. Marek Laskiewicz, he joins us for some analysis. Marek, glad to have you join us on the world. Let's look at some of these issues that have been raised. What do you make of the call between Trump, first to Russia, before, of course, he reverted to calling Zelensky?
It is quite clear. Donald Trump sees a way forward to make a peace with Putin. This peace is the one that he will then press forward. He has no real interest in what the Europeans have to say or the Ukrainians, because he believes that, first of all, the Europeans are ineffectual. He sees also probably that they'll get in the way in the sense of making all sorts of comments. And as for Ukraine, he can bring Ukraine to the table simply by removing all American subsidies, because it is to be noted, not only is America the biggest contributor, but in terms of quality of equipment, it is superior as well. And therefore, America holds the whip hand over Ukraine. So therefore, all that he has to do is work out a peace with Putin, and he feels that he can then, so to speak, force that peace onwards and therefore bring the war to a close, as he said he would.
Well, afterwards, he said he'd probably visit Moscow to see Putin, or that Putin will come over. Listening to the French foreign minister, he said there, we can't abandon Ukraine now because it will mean a law of the strongest, where tyrants could unilaterally invade countries. That is dangerous.
Well, there's two aspects here. First of all, his visit to Moscow is of immense importance, because it means that 3 years of saying Russia is a pariah, which is what the Western propaganda has been churning out, will be smashed in one go. Please note, apart from that, he never was a pariah, Putin, because he did have support from other Asian and other countries. But the point is that at that moment, Putin will be back sitting at the top table, once again in world terms, with the Americans. Number two, the dangers of invading countries. Well, there are three aspects here very important. For a start, it's not only tyrants and despots which talk about invading countries. I wish to mention ahem, that President Donald Trump himself is going on about Greenland and Panama, and incidentally the Gaza Strip. So I think the French minister ought to have said is that stronger nations should be stopped from invading. Number two, I'm afraid all these good words by the Europeans and saying it's dangerous so doesn't change the fact that in politics, especially in the military side, force is force. And therefore, it is impossible, I stress this, to think of a peace which will not at some point be broken, simply because no such thing has ever existed in human history, and no such thing ever will. At any given moment, somebody will see an opportunity to carry out acts of aggression or violence, and some of them have paid off in world history. After all, to name one point, the British Empire wasn't built by people who simply did everything pleasantly, so to speak, nor was the French Empire for its time. And so therefore, in that sense, there is nothing new in world history. And the pious hopes that this Ukrainian-Russian war is the war to end all wars is just that, pious hopes.
Well, the UK Defence Secretary Healy says any peace talks without Ukraine is not tenable.
What they're saying here is that Ukraine has its own agenda. Actually, we're now quite close to what I was saying in the book. There will come a time, as I wrote, that Ukraine will lose against Russia for the obvious reason that the West has other priorities. It is perhaps not stressed that Donald Trump's motives, and many people have speculated, they're missing the big one. America has a huge deficit. It really has a huge deficit, both in trade and its government debt. And in this sense, what Donald Trump is doing is balancing out the trade deficits with his tariff policy and simultaneously cutting back on spending wherever he can. And the obviously Ukraine war, 300 billion was said on your program, please remember, is an obvious case where he could stop the money going out. In fact, he now wants for money to be given to Ukraine on the basis of acquiring rare earths and so on. In other words, no longer just a simple grant, but in now a swap, a trade, if you like, so America doesn't lose out. So therefore, yes, he will carry on, and Ukraine does not accept this, probably will not accept it, but whether it can hold out against the brute force of American diplomacy is another matter.
Yeah, you mentioned brute force. I was just listening to Hegseth there talk, and it sounded to me like, I don't know whether it came across to you that way, like America, Trump, Hegseth, they're making unilateral decisions without bothering any other side, just them alone. I mean, for example, his comment on saying that it's unrealistic for Ukraine to join NATO.
Yes, you're quite right. It is unilateral because Trump simply is a unilateralist. He doesn't really like committees, from what I can see. He doesn't like people answering back at him. And therefore, if you look very carefully, you'll see that everybody he's appointed to be in his cabinet are people who agree with him. He doesn't want professionals. He wants people to agree with him and carry out his policies. The last thing he needs is a load of nations in NATO, as qua NATO or European Union, however you want to call them, coming in and arguing the toss with him. He doesn't want that. He wants a clear-cut decision as quickly as possible, especially on the financial side. He also doesn't like wars. It's a very important point. And actually, this is his Achilles heel. He said quite clearly there'll be no American boys or personnel sent to Ukraine. He's made it quite clear there'll be no commitment. He doesn't like wars, but at the same time, if America can't back up what it's saying by force, this will be in the long term, not immediately, not now as I'm speaking to you, but soon it'll come out to be his weak point. But going back to the other ones, he is deciding unilaterally. There is no NATO in the old sense of the word, because NATO is no longer working together. There is no transatlantic alliance in the old sense of the word. There is simply a set of people who are on pleasanter terms with him, the NATO countries and the EU, and he is making the decisions, and he is not even concerned about what President Zelensky thinks.
All right, before I let you go, just briefly, while listening to you make those comments, does this remind you of Hitler? I mean, does it remind you
Well,
of...
it is an interesting comment. The fact of the matter is that we are, how can I put it, conditioned to think in certain terms. The notion of there being unilateral action as opposed to multilateral is more associated with dictators, but there have been many dictators apart from Hitler, and some of them have in their history books, if you look at it, if you include kings, by the way, because kings are also one-man rulers or autocrats for many years, are by no means bad. So the point I'm making here is that Trump is unilateralist. He is going forward. He's quite determined to see through his vision on this. And in the sense that it is, if you like, a type of one-man rule, which is like dictators, then yes, there is a parallel here of sorts, yes.
All right, I guess the world should be thinking twice. Thank you so much, Dr. Marek Laskiewicz, for your interesting analysis.